Hello, and welcome to Scott's Odyssey. Born a New Yorker and later in life returning to his family roots in Pennsylvania, a young man whose imagination ran wild with stories told to him at his family's estate in Lock Haven planted a seed that later led to a life of history, conservation, reporting, but most importantly, folklore. Henry Wharton Shoemaker, founder of the Alpine Club and both the president and columnist of newspapers in Altoona, Jersey Shore, and Reading, later becoming a writer of the books that captured the stories of Pennsylvania mountain people and those who we once were, ultimately garnered him the title of Pennsylvania's first folklorist. I first came across Shoemaker's writings when investigating the Indian steppes of Tussey Mountain, linked up here. In this new series, I figure I'd venture into the telling a story Shoemaker wrote because they are mostly based on facts derived from the time period and truly capture the imagination, even if we cannot find the actual location of where he speaks. So without further ado, and in the spirit of Halloween, here's the tale of the Headless Man, or the story of an old river town, as written by Henry Wharton Shoemaker in 1913. That ghost of the stage driver who beat his horses wasn't the only spook I've seen, said the old gravedigger. I've seen dozens of them, so many that it's hard to keep them all in mind. It'd be difficult to tell which was the queerest one. They were all so strange. The old man's big brown eyes kindled with reminiscent fire as he sat down on a marble slab, marking all that was mortal of some Scotch-Irish celebrity, prepared to relate another marvelous experience. It was a bright November morning with the earth browning after the white frost of the night before. Except for being in an ancient cemetery, it seemed hardly the time of day to relate a ghostly experience. When I was a young lad, began the old man, I used to be out pretty late at night, courting the girls or playing cards. It wasn't anything for me to get home at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Midnight was early. There were 3 sisters, triplets, who lived near the dam, who were quite popular in town. They were North Irish girls and had only moved into our community recently. Their father was a camp boss at a big job near the mouth of Heiner Run. With 2 other young fellows, I spent many an evening in their society. They were good-natured and witty, so the time passed rapidly. However, when the clock struck 12, their mother would come to the head of the stairs and call to them that it was time to go to bed. That would have made some young men angry, but we liked the girls too much to care about such trifle. We merely picked up our caps and said, "Good night." Poor girls, they're all dead now. I dug the grave for the last one at Highland last April. Well, it was a long time ago since we did our courting. It was the last year of the war. One night in February, it was real cold. 12 o'clock sent us out into the street as usual. 2 of the boys lived in the upper end of town, so they followed River Street in that direction. I lived over near the lower railroad bridge, so cut across the town in the direction of the tracks. It was about 10 minutes past 12 when I reached the crossing, which was situated about half a square below where Pennsylvania Station now stands. There was no moon. Everything looked one somber mass of black. There was no dividing line between the mountains and the sky. When I got to the center of the crossover, I noticed a lantern flickering. It seemed to be 100 yards further down the track. It must be in the hands of a track walker, I thought. Being in no great hurry, I waited to have a word with the fellow, who appeared to be moving in my direction. I always liked to talk with people whom I met at night in the darkness. There seemed then to be picturesqueness to the dullest personalities. He seemed to be moving rapidly and was beside me in an incredibly short space of time. I turned to wish him a good evening when, to my horror, I saw the figure was headless. Where the head had been severed close to the shoulders was an ugly red gash. I could see it plainly by the lantern light. To my further dismay, I noticed that the creature carried the severed head under his left arm. With the right, he was swinging the lantern. I was about to call out, "Stop your fooling!" for I had recently seen the Rogers statuette of Ichabod Crane in the Headless Horseman, where the latter carried a pumpkin with eyes, nose, and mouth cut in it under one arm, and the being, or whatever it was, edged up close beside me. I had pretty strong nerves, for I had seen the stage driver's ghost and a couple of others, so I tried to hold my ground. The figure, which I might add was that of a big, powerful man, threw such a lot of strength into his task that I almost tumbled over on the rails. I wanted to cry out that I wished to go to my home down the track, but I recollected that if this should happen to be a ghost, I would spoil everything by speaking first. Evidently, the headless one wanted me to go up the tracks for some reason. While I was not particularly anxious to get home, I hated to be forced to do something against my will. I was not in the mood to fight, so I concluded to appease the figure by going in the direction he desired. So I turned about and started to stroll up the tracks toward the station. My pace did not seem to please the figure. He edged up beside me again, urging me to walk faster and faster. The railroad ran through the center of a sleeping town. I noticed that there was not a single light in any of the houses. Most of them were two-story frame structures with doors opening on the level with the railroad and the street. I had often seen people on the loneliest highways at midnight. Here, not a soul was stirring this night. I didn't even see a stray cat. As we neared the station, I saw a dim light burning in one of the windows. It was the telegraph for an agent who kept open until after the arrival of the 12:40 Pennsylvania Express. When we came abreast of the lighted window, I wanted to stop to get away from my tormentor. I peered through the window, but the operator was temporarily absent from his desk. In my moment of indecision, the thought flashed through my mind that perhaps this headless specter had something he wanted to show me. A spread rail or a burned-out tie further up the track. If so, there would be no time to hunt the operator. My watch said it was 15 minutes of train time. It would do no good anyway, as there wasn't an office open near that rattlesnake. The trouble might even be a mile up the track. I struck a more lively gait, which seemed to please the ghost tremendously. Divining that at last I understood him, was in sympathy with him, he forged ahead. I had to walk lively to keep up to him. My guess was right. I walked nearly a mile before I found why I was wanted. The time was running dangerously close to the train's schedule. Several times I looked at my watch by the rays of the ghost's lantern. Every step I took, I carefully scrutinized the rails, the condition of the ties, the state of the roadbed. I was not a railroader, but I lived near enough to the tracks to know the kind of defects which caused bad accidents. For over half a mile, our way led through the outskirts of the town or along the riverbank. There was a steep bank rising 50 feet above the track on the side furthest from the river. Finally, we came to a bend in the line where we entered a deep cut. The bank on the side nearest the river was at least 30 feet in height. It was so far from the shore that it wouldn't have paid to excavate it anyway. It was a melancholy, lonely spot, and darker here than anywhere we had traversed. When we came to the blackest part of the cut, the specter raised his lantern and swung it wildly. It seemed to be a signal for me to be on the alert, to meet a possible emergency. I looked ahead. By the lamplight, I could see a huge pile of old ties on the track. There were at least 40 of them. A dastardly attempt had been made to wreck the express. It was at that point, too, where the train still traveled at a high rate of speed before it began to slow down for the station. I knew now what the ghost wanted. It would be a big task, I figured. Just then I heard the faint echo of the train whistle, and it was probably at the crossing half a mile above Quinn's Run and a mile and a half from where the ties were piled up. It was a horrible moment of suspense, but I set to work with a will. When I started to roll the ties away, I found to my horror that they had been spiked together. They formed a compact mass that a Hercules could not budge without an axe and a spike maul. There was no use wasting time trying to do the impossible. I carried no implement bigger than a barlow, and rocks could not hammer the impediment loose. Meanwhile, the ghost was standing by, holding aloft his lantern so I could comprehend my job. I threw myself against the solid structure, then shook my head. I pointed up the track. I made a signal as if he must stop the train. For a moment, it seemed that he failed to understand me, so I seized the lantern and ran in the direction of the oncoming express. I did not look back to see what became of the ghost. The train whistled again, this time for the river bridge, half a mile above. In a minute more, it would be stopped or cause one of the worst wrecks in the history of the road. I thought of the poor souls asleep in the coaches who would be hurled into eternity, of the conductors, of the trainmen, all the stricken families. I must stop the train at any cost. I had another reason, a somewhat selfish one, for my intense vigilance. The cut was a long and deep one. I could not get out of it before the train hit the awful barrier. If I was found halfway up the bank or up or down the track by any possible survivors, I would be accused of the foul deed. I must stop it, or gladly die in the attempt. I could hear the train slow down a trifle as the long line of coaches rumbled over the old wooden bridge. One of the few bridges, by the way, which later survived the flood of 1865. And then it seemed to increase speed again and came bounding toward me through the night. I ran as fast as I could, tripping now and then on the ties, but determined to get as far as possible from the tie piles before beginning my flagging operation. I ran until I was breathless. Then I planted myself in the center of the track and began waving my lantern. Soon, the giant headlight and the big bulbous smokestack belching gray smoke and sparks hove into sight. It seemed as big as a mountain, as impossible to stop as a mountain landslide. It was a cold night, and I could hardly expect to see an engineerman's head leaning out of the cab window. I kept on waving and waving and waving. To my gesticulations, I added terrific shouts. I had a powerful voice, but all sound was lost in the roar of the oncoming express. I could not detect that my lantern was seen, and I had to jump off the track to avoid being run down. It was only a single track. I had barely room to lay flat against the smooth earth of the bank and avoid being sucked under the heavy black mail cars and coaches. I hardly dare look down the track as the long line of cars swept past me. As the last one lurched by, I felt that some motion on the handbrakes was in effect. It rocked unsteadily, though I saw nothing of any brakeman. I heard a second afterwards a hideous rasping and squeaking and wailing, like we hear on logging cars today when the brakes are thrown on at a trestle or some narrow gauge. The train almost left the track in its sudden halting. I knew all were saved. For half a minute I lay on the ground, unable to get up or speak. I was crawling to my feet when I saw the conductor, with face white as a sheet, carrying a lantern and accompanied by several passengers running in my direction. I was standing up, but shaking like a quaking asp when the parties reached me. They held out their hands, congratulating me and calling me a brave man. Other passengers and trainmen poured from the cars, and I was soon surrounded by a shouting crowd. Some of the men slapped me on the back so many times it added to the nausea I felt after my long run. One of the passengers offered me a $20 gold piece. I wanted it badly, but I knew I was entitled to no credit for what I had done. It was the ghost's doing, so I refused it. "Tell me your name, son, and we'll make a purse of gold and send it to your mother," said the same passenger, undaunted by my refusal. There was a chorus of, "Yes, yes, he saved our lives," and so on. I deliberately gave them a wrong name and address in town. Some of them wrote it in their notebooks. I felt sorry a moment later, as someone in the throng might recognize me, especially as I knew quite a few trainmen. But all faces appeared strange to me. I could make my escape. If credit was due, it was to the headless ghost, but this I could not very well explain. I could not get away very fast, as everyone wanted to know how I found the tie pile and how soon before the train appeared. I explained everything in detail with becoming modesty. No one could understand my modesty, especially when I seemed so indifferent to a reward. In the excitement, everyone had forgotten about removing the obstruction. They were amazed when I told them that the ties were spiked together. It took the enginemen and firemen and brakemen and passengers half an hour to get it off the track. They worked with axes, saws, with picks and pokers gathered from the emergency kits in the coaches and from the engine. Everyone from the engineman down insisted on shaking hands with me before the train started. The engineman, a queer fat old fellow, scratched his head saying, "It was the closest running I've ever made after I saw you. It was my quickest stop." "Say, Pop," said the young fireman, just as they were climbing into the cab, "did you notice a man down by the tie pile? He seemed to duck back of it just as we stopped." "No, I did not," said the old man with surprise. "Could he have been the wrecker?" I believe it was the headless man. There was no time for further talk. The train was now nearly an hour late, so all hands got on board. I even declined to ride on the train as far as town. It is a wonder my actions did not arouse some suspicion. But everyone was too excited. I waited until the red tail lights were out of sight and then leisurely wended my way down the tracks toward home. At the first crossing, I left the ties and struck across town in the direction of the mountains. I was home and in bed by 3:30. The next day, all the town was agog with the story of the dastardly attempt to wreck the Philadelphia Express. Everyone wanted to find the stranger who prevented the horrible catastrophe so nobly. I said to myself, if there's any glory or rewards, they go to the headless man, not me, and I will keep out of it. It was a 7 days wonder. Like events of even greater magnitude, in due season, it was forgotten. I used to like to talk to the railroaders, especially after the wreck. One of the section hands, quite an old man, told me about a brother of his, the first track walker on the section after the road was built several years before, who had been beheaded by the Philadelphia Express the night of its first run. That was a couple of years back, mind you. In a moment, it flashed through my mind, the headless man was the spirit of that track walker. It was he who had saved the trains the night when I figured as an unwilling hero. Yet, I hated to tell the old man I had seen his brother's ghost. Doubtless the specter had haunted the railroad during these years, watching jealously the safety of others. The ghost had conquered my reluctance and had brought me to the scene just in the nick of time. I had known at least one ghostly hero. If such deeds are of consequence in the land of shades, this track walker, he earned a blessed immortality. Let me know in the comments below if you would like me to read more of these historical tales by Henry Wharton Shoemaker. Remember to click like and subscribe to the channel for more ODDySEEy stories of who we once were. Thank you for watching. Have a safe and happy Halloween, and I'll see you on the next video.